and thank you all for having me today. It is an honor to get to spend Sunday morning with you all. And as he said, I'm Amy Peterson. I'm the Director of Religious Education at White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church. I've been there for the last 10 years, and I am currently on sabbatical, which is why I get to be here with you all today. Previous to that, I was in Flint, Michigan for about 10 years before I came here. And so as you can imagine, much of what I bring to you all today comes from my experiences working with children, youth, and adults of those two congregations, as well as my own lived experience as a mother of two teenagers and a lifelong UU. So as a religious educator, I get to ask kids and adults lots of fun and challenging questions, and a couple of times each year I try to make it a point to ask the children and youth in my congregation why it is they come to church. It might not totally surprise you to learn that cookies is the most consistent response I have gotten from kids in both congregations I've served. And to be fair, it looks like your donut game is on par. Yeah. My number two answer that I've gotten is, my parents make me. And I think this is probably also fair. Sorry, Mom and Dad, that probably would have been my answer as well when I was a kid. And over the years, I've learned to take this answer not quite so personally. Kids sometimes feel a little bit powerless when it comes to the day-to-day activities of their families, and they will not miss an opportunity to name this if asked directly. And also sometimes, this might be true for some of you as well, I also feel a little grumpy about getting out of bed on a Sunday morning, so this feels normal to me. But really, the reasons our children and youth name for coming to church are about as varied as the answers you all might give. They say they have friends at church, they like the music, maybe you all have some favorite hymns that bring you here, they get to play, we talk about being kind, we love people for who they are, and sometimes kids will simply say, I come to church because this is my church. So when I asked this question a few months back, I was floored when more than the normal number of kids told me that they come to church because this is a place where they can bring their big feelings. One of the kids even commented, I come here because I can have an emotional meltdown here, and I can't do that at school. And this might be a little relatable to some of us, right? There are so few places where we are explicitly invited to bring our deepest grief, our biggest joys, and our senses that we might be a little lost. Rituals like the Joys and Sorrows ritual that you all just shared are beautiful, and they are such a great way to demonstrate to one another of all ages that whatever we hold in our hearts, we do not have to hold it alone. In this community, we can see one another in our full humanity and hold it all together, right? And so now I have a confession to make. I have to tell you, and some of you might be surprised by this, especially if you know I was raised Unitarian Universalist. I'm raising my own kids UU, and my work is UU religious education. But I am deeply skeptical about church. I sometimes wrestle with religious language. I spend a lot of time thinking about issues around power dynamics and authority in institutions. I question whether organized religion has overall been a force for good in our world. And yes, I hold Unitarian Universalist institutions with the same skepticism as other organized religions. I ask that question, why church, of our children and youth, and today of all of you, in part because I'm sitting with that same question. Why church? Does what we do here matter? Does organized religion in general offer something good to the world that we cannot find somewhere else? Now, I'm willing to bet, and I don't want to call anyone out here, that maybe perhaps some of you have wrestled with these same questions. And I'm glad we get to hold them together. I actually think that this skepticism is a really powerful tool and can help us hold our work in our community with great intention, humility, and care. The good news is, sort of, that those of us who are church skeptics are not at all alone. It is no secret that church attendance across UU churches and all denominations has been trending down. You may have seen the reports over the last 10 to 20 years or so about the rise of the nones, or the sharp increase in the number of people who would check the none of the above box on surveys when asked about religious identity. Casper ter Kuile, in his book, The Power of Ritual, Turning Everyday Activities into Soulful Rituals, explains this cultural shift away from religious communities. 50 years ago, he says, most people in the United States relied on a single religious community to offer connection, conduct spiritual practices, ritualize life moments, foster healing, connect to lineage, inspire morality, house transcendent experience, mark holidays, support families, serve the needy, work for justice, and through art, song, text, and speech, tell and retell a common story to bind them together. That's a lot that we got from our religious communities. And what he says is true. How and where we seek connection in our society has changed drastically over the last 50 years. Everything about our world has changed drastically in the last 50 years, so why wouldn't our religious communities? Ter Kuile, as a part of his work with the Sacred Design Lab, studied the communities that people are turning to in droves to meet the spiritual needs that are no longer being met in religious communities. Communities like CrossFit, dinner parties, and even summer camps for adults. He tells stories about how these communities have offered deep care for one another, members cooking meals for one another if someone is sick or going through a hard time, coaches taking phone calls from group members looking for emotional support, groups taking up collections to help others when times are tight. And I would bet that if we asked those who have chosen these secular communities why they have done so, you would find some of the very same answers that you all might have for coming here. In fact, ter Kuile identifies 6 common trends in why they say they gather: community, personal transformation, social transformation, purpose finding, creativity, and accountability. Maybe some of those resonate with you. Now, I think that there's a couple important points here. One, even in the midst of a world that has changed drastically, there are some deep human needs that stay the same. We all want to feel seen, connected, and supported. And on the whole, I agree with ter Kuile's assessment that it is not terrible that we as a society are at least looking for ways to meet our spiritual and community needs. 2, I think it's good and important to be a part of multiple groups where we find connection, fulfillment, and growth. Just in case you all thought I was telling you to take your skepticism and quit church and go join CrossFit. It's not what's happening here. We all contain multitudes, so you can be a church skeptic and belong to CrossFit if you choose. But whatever communities we choose to engage in, I hope that we are doing it with great intention and care. 3, something is missing. In all the case studies of all the groups that people are flocking to meet their spiritual needs, I did not see one explicit invitation to cultivate an intergenerational community. Even the summer camp for adults, which was created to meet the desire for, quote, childlike creativity, play, and fun, is not for children. There are precious few places in our society where generations of unrelated children and adults of all ages are encouraged to gather, share wisdom, and often care. And so, all this to say, if you were wondering why, in all of my skepticism, why it is I do what I do for work or why I do church, what I keep coming back to is that religious communities are one of the few places in our society where we can hold space for generations to gather together and share their stories and care for one another. I do this work because all of us of all ages need intentional space to do the same ancient thing that humans have been doing since the beginning of time: to find connection, conduct spiritual practices, ritualize life moments, work for justice, tell and retell common stories that bind us together, to have a space to bring our skepticism and our big feelings, to wrestle with big questions in community, to find others who share the experience of loss and grief and joy, and to be fully seen and celebrated as we break bread and sometimes cookies and donuts together, to have a safe space to shed the tears that might not be welcome in school or at work or even at home. In the words of Nick Cave, this is my defense of religion, I guess. Another quick story. I recently came across one of my first annual reports I wrote way back in 2005 for the congregation I was serving in Flint, Michigan at the time. Thank you, Mom, for that. She was the one who found it. We were in the midst of a lead minister transition, and I had been in my work as a religious educator for all of a year and a half. I was just a baby religious educator. This was also a time of rebuilding a program for children and youth in Flint. We didn't have a ton of children and families that were attending regularly, and there had been a lot of back and forth in conversation about how we could draw more families into our congregation. Some congregants were struggling with the idea of children being present in worship, and others were feeling alienated by their community because they did not feel that children were welcome unless they were quietly tucked away in the back of the building. And this is the hard work of community and a very common conversation that our congregations are having. Building intentional space for a wide circle of sometimes conflicting needs and experiences can be really, really hard and messy, but it's really important work. And so as a lifelong UU, I knew that many of my peers left UU churches because they simply had no other experience of community than their religious education classes. So once they bridged out of youth group, they simply had no connection left in their church communities. And I also knew that their parents were leaving their churches once their kids left high school because they were the ones who were asked to lead all the programs and classes for the children and youth during worship, so they never had a chance to deepen connections in the community outside the classroom. So I was advocating in this moment for two things. For those who were not actively parenting to sign up to teach classes, which is truly a gift for children to know that real, live adult UUs exist who are not related to them, and a gift to parents who could use a break, and a gift to those who facilitated these classes to witness Unitarian Universalism through the eyes of children. It truly is life-giving. The other thing I advocated for was more intergenerational worship experiences. Now, I know that what I just said is scary. And it was scary then, and it's scary when I bring it up to any congregation. It's scary to the kids who are like, oh, I got to sit through worship. It's a little scary for the parents who are like, I got to be with my kid in worship, and worried that the fidgets and noises of children would not be welcome. And anyone who is afraid that a worship experience that is kid-friendly might become devoid of any deeper meaning. But hang with me. It truly is so powerful for children and adults to be able to experience worship together. When we worship, we hold up what is of worth, right? Worthship. This is what worship means. We share stories that become part of our canon of wisdom tales. We demonstrate rituals that anchor us when times are tough. We witness what Unitarian Universalism and what love looks like and sounds like. And we learn songs that become the soundtrack of our joys and sorrows. While small groups divided up by age are important and good for kids and for adults, the kids don't always have to be at the kids' table, and the adults don't always have to be at the grown-up table. A religious education program, I said in my report, cannot survive without the entire congregation, I wrote in all caps and bolded. While we have come so far in efforts to become more intentionally welcome to our children and youth and inviting them to feel like they are part of the community, there is still more we can do. And this was true then, and this is true now. We all have work to do, not just as individual Unitarian Universalist congregations, right? This loss of intergenerational community is endemic in an increasingly divided society. We are divided by politics, by religion, by in-person communities giving way to exclusively social media, and increasingly divided by age. And there are a few other important trends that I have been noticing post-pandemic. One, parents of children are utterly exhausted. The isolation of the pandemic led directly back into busy lives, and they are feeling under-resourced and under-supported. Two, our children are struggling. There was a real loss of skill building during the isolation of the pandemic, and the relationship between parents and children suffered greatly as parents became full-time caregivers, teachers, therapists, and more to our children. Three, adults of all ages are deeply craving connection. We're lonely as a society. There's been so much written in the last few years about the loneliness epidemic that we are facing, and I am hearing loud and clear from families of all shapes and sizes and ages a deep desire to intentionally push back against rugged individualism and build sustaining community, because we have learned that none of us can do this alone. We are living in a time and a society that so clearly values individualism over community, even in our quests for a deeper spiritual life, and it is hurting all of us. And Unitarian Universalism is particularly susceptible to an individualistic approach to spirituality. It can be really easy to forget that while we might all be on our own spiritual journeys, our journeys are connected and so enhanced when we do it together. We all have so much wisdom to share with one another at every stage of life. We are also living in a time where we are witnessing the rise of nationalism, continued violence in schools, attacks on the rights and lives of trans kids, and our kids are inundated with news and reels and sucked into algorithms on social media. Our kids and their families desperately need a soft place to land where they can be themselves, feel seen, and explore the questions alongside those who are willing to risk journeying together. And adults need energy, wisdom, and the hope that comes from being present in the lives of children. The benefits of intergenerational communities and relationships are so clear. Intergenerational connections bring with them cognitive benefits for all ages, a decrease in isolation for all ages and for their caretakers, an increase in self-esteem, a greater sense of belonging, and a greater understanding of those who have life experiences that are different from us. And for me personally, I don't know that I could even name all of the ways that intergenerational community impacted me as a child, as a teenager, and now as an adult. It is these relationships that bring my skeptical heart back to church again and again and again. I truly believe that intergenerational community is an act of resistance. As Bell Hooks reminds us, communities sustain life, not nuclear families or the couple, and certainly not the rugged individualist. There is no better place to learn the art of loving than in community. May it be so.